Hello, if you don't know, my name is Jacques Narpo, director of documentary Tales of Brooklyn. We are here today with two of our lovely guests.
My name is Dianne Morales. I'm a Bed-Stuy lifer and a member of Bed-Stuy's Strong mutual aid group and a candidate for New York City mayor.
Hi, I'm Sade Fasanya. I am a Brooklyn native, a social worker, photographer, and an educator.
I think I'm the eldest here, right?
you definitely speak your piece first.
A lot of changes actually. So I have two kids who are college age, and they've seen it, and they talk about what they've seen in our community. But when I think about my own childhood, I think one of the things that is the starkest with the gentrification and the sort of diversifying of the community is that sense of when I grew up, we all sort of knew each other. People, families around the block, and the kids all knew each other, and there was a sense of kind of like looking out for each other, and which sometimes as a kid you didn't want, right? Because you didn't want that lady down the block telling your mother that you were doing X, Y, or Z. But there was that sense, and I think that is one of the things that for me I think about is definitely doesn't exist in the same way anymore.
So for me, I think honestly it's a visual thing for me, not solely, but I think when I'm looking at how much Brooklyn has changed, every time I go downtown Brooklyn, which literally used to be like this hub, that was the place like, people that look like me, people of color went to shop, and you had your Jimmy Jazz, you had your Hyperactive. That was, downtown Brooklyn, Fulton Street was where we went to shop, where we went to hang out. And now, downtown Brooklyn is filled with so many skyscrapers and pointy, shiny buildings. And that's just not at all what it used to look like. That's not what it stood for. There's stores down there that I'm like, who in the community can afford this? I think at some point there was an Armani Exchange downtown Brooklyn. Albee Square Mall is like completely gone now, and now it's like City Point. And, when I think about it in terms of maybe positivity, there are a lot of new things like resources, grocery stores that have better health options or, available to the community, but I don't know that it's fully providing for the communities that are still, in Brooklyn, the native Brooklynites. I don't think that these new things are necessarily catering to them. One, just because of affordability. So yeah, when I first think about it in terms of those changes, I look at it that way, and just having a city that I grew up in that doesn't even look familiar anymore.
I think for me as a transplant, because I'm originally from Louisiana, and I came up here for college. It was daunting to me because I kind of got some of that. It's like late 2000, like mid 2010s, and from what everyone says about Brooklyn, if you're not from there, it's the authenticity of the culture. Very diverse place because a lot of people are there, immigrants from Spanish and African countries, and just coming here and just seeing like the outrageous prices, I was like, and the high-rise buildings and certain things, it just felt like I was like, is this just like another, just like alternative Manhattan? But I used to stay in Brownsville. That's where I spent a lot of my time. And then just seeing even places like that where it used to be like, okay, this is more of a kind of the left behind low income area. And even to see that overturn over time, kind of daunting, because I used to stay, when I lived in this neighborhood, I would tell them, yeah, I live in Brownsville. They'd be like, you live in Brownsville? Like, you sure? And then when I moved back, I guess 2 years later, the realtor was like, yeah, we're gonna go to a coffee shop on Eastern Parkway. And I was like, coffee shop on Eastern Parkway? Just threw me off. So for me, I was kind of surprised by how rapid it is. Like over 1 or 2 years, you see the face of a block totally change. And it just, you question, all right, maybe they're coming here for, from an economic standpoint, you're coming here for lower rent. I totally get that. But is anybody thinking about the families that had to leave and where did they go? And people who are long life Brooklynites were telling me, like New Jersey, go moving upstate, depending on where they were going. So it's just a shame to see the people, just because they're not in a good enough financial situation, they don't have control of their own destinies. And how that affects generations to generations, because people moved here to start to escape maybe where they're coming from and whatnot, and just the fact that you can't even control that.
So even to the point of like thinking about like Bronzeville and it being like, oh my gosh, Bronzeville, like yes, because I lived at a certain point in Bronzeville and it was like, oh my gosh, Bronzeville, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I mean, call it weird, but I'm like, that's changed now. Like where it's like, oh, Bronzeville, you can walk through Bronzeville and it's super watered down in terms of, I guess, in terms of diversity. But it also makes me think about how many of our traditional neighborhoods have been rezoned and now have new names that makes it sound more appealing. And some of these names are smaller community, for example, like Ocean Hill or Weeksville, that they were smaller communities that always existed. But I think, I would say as a native Brooklynite, I didn't know what Weeksville was. It was Crown Heights. We called it Crown Heights. I didn't know what Ocean Hill was. It was Bronzeville. It was all Bronzeville. But I find that these new names are popping up, or names that just were not commonly used before, almost seemingly to appeal to a new crowd of people who were when I talk to people who are transplants and living in Brooklyn, I'm like, oh, where do you live? And they're like, East Williamsburg. And I'm like, what's...
Or like they say Prosper Lefferts Garden. And it's like, you mean Flatbush. Just say Flatbush.
That is actually a strategy that real estate agencies use. Like they rename communities to make them more appealing and make them more palatable to certain people so that they can appeal to that audience. I mean, it's a proven strategy that they use.
Yeah.
I'm in Bed-Stuy, and there's so there's Stuyvesant Heights, right? Which did not exist when I was a kid. And when I first moved into my house now, which was almost 20 years ago, they were trying to rename the part of Bed-Stuy that I'm in Bedford Village. And people were like, no. But instead what started happening was the line of where Clinton Hill is started moving closer and closer. So that line has moved significantly from when I was a kid.
My question would be, so if you're a head of a city council that's a part of the Bed-Stuy, maybe you're a head of the local government there, do you have the power to go to real estate developer and say, hey, you can't, if you're going to represent it, is that within the domain of,
So it's not the explicit power. So really it's the city government, the mayor and the HPD and those kinds of offices, departments that have that power. However, we just saw what happened in Industry City.
Yeah.
The community has tremendous power. If we organize ourselves and channel and focus our power, there's, we saw it in Amazon last year or the year before, and we just saw it in Industry City, what is really possible with people power, right? Even if you don't have explicitly that power. Because the reality of it is government is supposed to actually work for us, right? So it's just that's gotten away from us a lot.
That's like
a nice light question.
It's so loaded. It's so loaded because I think at this point, this is what, September? End of September? Like, it's hard to now distinguish COVID, the pandemic, from like the civil uprising that has happened. And that was, a racial pandemic that's not new to this country, that's not new to our community. And so now so many of that has gotten blurred together, where we're seeing so many of the issues and the disparities with COVID as a pandemic, once again, affecting particularly and specifically communities of color. How it's affected me, I'm a social worker working at a nonprofit where I run a men's shelter located in Brooklyn. And, it was hard just like kind of trying to navigate how are we going to keep the clients that we're working with safe and like transitioning them from shelter to hotels, which in itself was a stressful thing for the clients, for the staff, for me. How do you keep yourself safe while still trying to service people in your community who need you and who need that extra support? How do you take care of your like self-care and mental health? And then you had the protests like coming up, and as a photographer, like I was out documenting the protests, and that in itself just was like a whole range of emotions. And, just, I mean, for me, it's really been an up and down roller coaster. But now it's hard to think about COVID outside of like fighting systemic oppression. To me, it's all really just kind of one big.
Yeah, that's my next question. It's specifically.
it's one big thing that we're all like trying to tackle. And there's a beauty in it as well, right? There's a beauty in watching people rise up and speak out against like oppression and speak out against, what we deserve in terms of healthcare, in terms of how do we stay safe from this pandemic. So it's a range of emotions with that.
I'm just going to say this. A lot of the same things you said in a different way. I think there is an inextricable link between COVID and all of the other things that you're talking about, right? It just sort of pulled the curtain back in a way that is hard for people to pretend they don't see anymore, right? It just exposed all of the deeply ingrained inequities that already existed in our communities, right? The health disparities that are not, necessarily genetic, or that, are genetic as a result of years and, centuries of being exposed to certain conditions. The fact that, I think it's like 80 something percent of the New York City workforce is actually, these sort of essential service workers. And that 63% of them are people of color and immigrants and women, right? And so, it just exposed the economic disparities, the lack of access to healthcare. What I flashed to was at the beginning when they used to show us those maps, those heat maps, with like the, dots of like where the communities were, where the cases were highest. And, there's not a mistake that those communities were the sort of highest concentration of people of color, highest concentration of, poverty, like all of these things that I think for me have further fueled my sort of commitment to, not being polite anymore about these things, to just be unapologetic about the fact that this has to go. Like I keep saying to people, like, I'm not going back. Like, I don't want normal, whatever that normal was, because that wasn't good for, like, we know now, like, I don't want to pretend anymore that normal was actually good for the percentage of us that it wasn't, right? Like that's not insignificant. And so, I feel kind of a compulsion to work to actually just wipe the slate clean and start over and build our city the right way, right? Because like it wasn't built the right way to begin with. So that's kind of
the larger concern I had was when I started understanding that, okay, a lot of people were laid off of work, couldn't pay their rent, therefore if they couldn't pay their rent, there's a huge sum of property taxes that aren't going to be paid because landlords are feeling like, well, I don't have my money, I'm not going to pay my property taxes. And you have certain communities in Brooklyn that if they even aren't gentrified, they're somewhat ignored. So how is that going to circle back on later, maybe next year, when certain things that in your community that can affect like the property value. So, and then you have all the people moving out because you had a lot of transplants and gentrifiers who couldn't afford to stay. So they left. So you have an empty housing market that can't be filled right now. So is Brooklyn stagnant now, or is there a mindset in the people that, okay, we done been through this, people tried to take advantage of what Brooklyn was becoming, those people might not be here anymore, and we need since the uprisings there have been a lot of white people that have been definitely had harsh conversations there. I mean, I honestly was surprised about how all the white people that came out and were protesting in Brooklyn and just across New York and across America as a whole. So if anything, I think it's like a flame that shouldn't be wasted. And there are a lot of things that with all this energy that about what we could change, it needs to either be done right now or like you said, like there's no going back. Because there's no point. I think people like yourself and other politicians and even community leaders need to be in the business of, all right, like these are the names, the people where the money's going. This is why this is like this. so people know what I'm fighting against. I feel like a lot of regular folk, they're like, you know, we always say, you know, they gonna do what they gonna do, or you know, it's them.
Right.
You know, we always give it like in a random adjective or a random pronoun just for some, because we don't know what the machine or the system specifically is. But I think at this point, like, people really are like, no, I want to know what it is, and I want to like stop it because I need to be able to feed my kids, and I want to make sure that like I can continue what I, you know, this work I've been putting in.
So I got involved in mid-March, in the sort of establishment of a mutual aid group, B.A.C.C Strong, which has actually served over 15,000 neighbors in the community. I think one of the things that has done is to bring some of us back to, because mutual aid is not new, as much as it's like kind of the word of the day in New York, at least right now. I don't know what it's like in other cities, but like mutual aid actually goes back to our communities, like to back in the day, right? The whole village concept, the whole idea of taking care of your neighbors, the whole idea of, you know, the village raising your children. There is something about that concept that I think that folks who have entered our communities and who are, you know, are beginning, I think, to recognize the role that they have played in the displacement of, you know, previous Brooklyn natives or that kind of thing, need to take a certain amount of responsibility in terms of reparations, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is something to be said for the dialogue that is possible right now, going back to the coalition that you were talking about, the diversity of people who are, you know, seeing the injustice in a particular way and feeling some type of way about it, although not clearly being able to do the analysis of like, you know, what role have I played in this, or, you know, how does this mean I need to do things differently? But it has opened the possibility to have those conversations, and to me that there is something transformational in that moment and in that opportunity that we have to take and we have to push for, because there is something inspiring about people, about us being in this space with a diverse coalition of people who are maybe not understanding their role in it, but understanding that something's wrong.
Yeah.
Right, seeing that thing. And so it puts us again in the position of being educators.
Yeah.
Right, because we have to teach about the impact, and when you do this, it does that. But, you know, I don't see a way for us to never have to do that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's an opportunity for us to say, this is the education that you need to, the educating that you need to do of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of like this idea of like not feeling complicit with having other people, they or them, you know, be the ones fighting for justice. I know, you know, I always tell, so I teach as well, and what I tell my students, you know, because I teach social welfare policy, and they're very much like, oh my gosh, everything is so messed up. What are we going to do? There's no change in it. And I constantly tell them, like, everybody has a role in the revolution. Our roles are not going to look the same, and we all need to understand that and be comfortable in that. There should not be any shaming in what you did versus what I did, kind of, but we should all have a role, and we should all feel as though we should have a role. So I think, like, in this time, educating people is big, and there's been so many, you know, there's the protests, right? And I know people who are like, that's just not for me. You know, people are like, you know, they're so fearful of COVID. Some people are just like, health reasons, I can't go out and do that. But there's been so many other activities and community organization around educating people about the census, about voting and voters' rights, and how to like contact your local councilman. And so what I would say is for folks to be a little bit more vigilant in their communities, because I've seen so many community-based projects and events happening, you know, these days. And it's been really awesome to see, because everyone's really centering things around educating the community. So, for example, like Skate Aerobics, who's like this athletic group where they're like getting people to come out and do skate lessons, and they've been doing things, and they're always centering it around like educating the community as well. So various things like there's been block parties like Build in Bed-Stuy, like they have, you know, like a marketplace, and again, they're educating the community. So it's, you know, I get that the reality for many folks is, you know, I'm just trying to live day to day and like get my kids to school, get to work, get groceries, get back home. But it's also knowing that what can you do to kind of, because we all have a voice, right? What can you do? Like when maybe on the weekends you can take your kid out, like, you know, on the block to a skate aerobics event and maybe educate yourself or whoever during that time. So just trying to find the ways to educate and to be a part of the movement, because being complicit is not, it's not gonna work for us. And we really like need all hands on deck. And I think, you know, just knowing where you can play a role in your community, or educating yourself, or educating a neighbor or your family members.